Hello everyone. Today's topic is transmission of nerve impulse. So let us study nerve impulse first. What is nerve impulse? It is actually a stimulus which is received by the neurons with the help of our five sense organs. So whenever neurons receive any stimulus with the help of sense organ, that stimulus travels through the neurons to our CNS, and that stimulus reaches the CNS or travels the CNS in the form of an electrical current. That electrical current which carries the information, which carries the message, is known as nerve impulse. It is known as nerve impulse because it travels through the nerves, and transmission is actually the conduction of nerve impulse. So let us study how does this conduction, means transmission of nerve impulse, take place in our body. This transmission of nerve impulse takes place in three main steps. These three steps are polarization, depolarization and repolarization. These are in sequence only, you cannot disarrange the sequence. So let us study first what is polarization. From the name itself only it is cleared when some poles develop. Poles means some charges develop. Where do these charges develop and how? These charges develop across or along the axon membrane, because information or nerve impulse actually travels through the axon of the neurons. So axon membrane develops some charges outside the membrane or inside the membrane. This process of development of charges is known as polarization. Now let us begin. How does this nerve impulse travel and how is it generated? First of all, when axon membrane is at a resting potential, when axon membrane or a nerve fiber is at a rest, means it does not receive any stimulus. When it has not received any stimulus, then that nerve fiber which is made up of neuron is said to be at rest. Resting nerve fiber, when it is at rest, it does not carry any impulse. Why so? Because it has high concentration of potassium ions inside and also some negatively charged proteins. Repeating, on a resting nerve fiber, inside the resting nerve fiber there is high concentration of potassium ion and also very high concentration of some negatively charged protein, but outside the resting nerve fiber, outside the axon membrane of a resting nerve fiber, there is less concentration of potassium ions and more concentration of sodium ions. This results in the development of an concentration gradient. When a nerve fiber does not carry any impulse, when it is at a rest, it has more concentration of potassium ions inside the membrane and less concentration of potassium ion outside the membrane. Then it is said to be at a rest. So it is actually a resting nerve fiber. When it is at a resting nerve fiber, it creates a concentration difference, like more inside and less outside. This concentration difference is known as concentration gradient. Now to understand this entire concept, you will have to understand first what is concentration gradient. Concentration gradient is change in the concentration, the difference in the concentration between any two sides. When this concentration difference develops, then things move either two ways, either along the concentration gradient or things can move against the concentration gradient. When things move along the concentration gradient, then they move from high concentration to low concentration, and when things move against the concentration gradient, then they move from the area of low concentration to the area of high concentration. Let us study how. Now this potassium ion has more concentration inside the membrane and less outside the membrane. If potassium ions will move from this area of low concentration, means from inside to outside, then it is along the concentration gradient. But when potassium ions which are less outside, when they move from the outside to inside, then it is against the concentration gradient. So here Polarization phase develops when a nerve fiber doesn't carry impulse, it has more concentration of potassium ions inside and less outside. Thus, these ions move against the concentration gradient here. Here movement of these ions is against the concentration gradient. So, what will happen? Sodium ions which were already more outside, they still come more from inside. Sodium ions move out and potassium ions which were less outside, they move in from low concentration to high. This movement which is against the concentration gradient requires some energy. So, energy which cell use is always in the form of ATP. So, with the help of one ATP molecules, here 3 sodium ions move out and 2 potassium ions come inward. As a result, it develops positive charge outside the axon membrane, or you can say nerve fiber, and negative charge develops inside the nerve membrane. At this stage, this nerve membrane, or you can say axon membrane, is said to be at a polarized phase. Polarization phase means when it is at a resting phase, when it does not carry any impulse. So, at this stage, nerve fiber is also can be said at a resting potential. When is it at a resting potential? When it doesn't carry any impulse and it has positive charge outside the axon membrane and negative charge inside the axon membrane. And how do these charges develop? We have studied. Now, move on to next stage, depolarization. Depolarization means opposite to this, when reverse happens. This reverse will happen when at any stage of the axon membrane, this is full axon membrane, when at any stage it receives any stimuli. Suppose at this stage, at this much area, it receives any stimuli. So, we can label this part as a B and rest remaining part we can label as a B site. At A site, when it receives any stimuli, when it receives any stimuli, then what happens at that area only, at that particular point which receives any stimuli, that particular point, at that particular point axon membrane becomes freely permeable to sodium ions. Axon membrane becomes freely permeable to sodium ions. As a result, sodium ions move now inward, reverse will happen. So, sodium ions move inward. There is very high influx of sodium ion. Influx means more amount of sodium ions come inward. Why so? Because at this point which I have labeled as A, at this point when axon membrane receive any stimuli, then axon membrane becomes freely permeable to sodium ions. So, sodium ions move inward. As a result, positive charge develops inside the membrane and negative charge develops outside the axon membrane. So, at this stage, this particular point A is now called as at depolarized phase. So, at depolarized phase, now it is said to be at a stage when action potential has developed. It has developed an action potential. When this action potential develops, then only nerve impulse travels. When action potential develops, then only nerve impulse travels. Now, it has led to the generation of the nerve impulse at the point of depolarization. Do remember, only A point, this area is at a depolarized phase, or you can say it is at an action potential, and B area is still at a polarized phase because it still has positive charge outside and negative inside. Now, this action potential moves forward. When it moves forward, what will happen? Now, this area will become depolarized. It will have negative charge outside and positive inside. Now, this reverse will happen here. And this previous area A, which is right now at depolarized stage, when nerve impulse from this area moves to the B, the A will become repolarized. It will come to repolarized phase, and this area will be depolarized, and the next area will still be at polarized phase. So, this way the A is at third stage will come at repolarized phase, and now impulse will move on to next stage B, and this B stage will become depolarized, and C will still be at first phase, polarized phase. So, impulse when it will move to further So this polarized will now become depolarized and this will again become repolarized. So in this way impulse travel to next phase in stages. This repolarization is when the area which is depolarized again gets the same earlier position, it is said to be at repolarized phase. This repolarized stage is actually necessary, and the time taken by a depolarized phase to come back to repolarize, this time duration is known as refractory period. Refractory period, repeating, the time taken by depolarized phase to come back to repolarized, and this refractory period or repolarization of that particular membrane is quite necessary. Why so? Unless the exon membrane is repolarized, it cannot carry next impulse. So receive the next impulse, to receive the next stimuli, it must to become at a repolarized phase. This is also necessary for the unidirectional flow of the impulse. We have studied that impulse always travels in one direction. Because it travels in one direction, this is only possible if previous area will become repolarized. If this is depolarized, previous area will become repolarized. So impulse cannot go back. That is why repolarization of the impulse is necessary. Why so? For the unidirectional flow of impulse, and second is to carry the next stimuli. So this time taken by the depolarized to come back to repolarized is known as refractory period. So the two advantages of the refractory period is it allows unidirectional flow of information, and to receive next stimuli it is necessary. So this was all about transmission of nerve impulse. Do remember this transmission which takes place in three phases: polarization, depolarization, repolarization. This type of transmission of nerve impulse is done by non-modulated neurons. What are non-modulated neurons? The neurons which do not bear myelin cover, the neurons which do not bear myelin sheath outside. So the neurons which bear myelin sheath, and we know myelin sheath is absent at places. So the neuron which bear myelin sheath, they are modulated neuron or myelinated neuron. And how do these neurons carry the impulse now? They have myelin sheath which act as an insulator. When impulse travels through myelin sheath, it can travel continuously. What about the places where myelin sheath is absent? We have done, those places are known as nodes of Ranvier. So polarization and depolarization, these stages, these steps, this polarization, depolarization occurs at nodes of Ranvier only of modulated neuron. So impulse travels by jumping from one node of Ranvier to another node of Ranvier. This type of transmission of nerve impulse by the modulated neuron is known as saltatory conduction of nerve impulse. Why saltatory conduction? Saltatory has been derived from a word salte, which means leap. Leap means jumping. So you can also call it leap conduction of nerve impulse, when impulse travels by jumping from one node of Ranvier to another. Because polarization, depolarization can take place only at these places. Why not at these places? Because here they already have myelin sheath. So that is why it results in rapid, faster flow of impulse. So this was all about today's topic, transmission of nerve impulse. It overs here. Hope you have understood. And then if you have understood and liked, don't forget to hit like and subscribe the channel. Thank you.